All right, everyone. The war pigs in Congress have gathered together to rebuke Donald Trump. Why? Because he wants to withdraw from Syria and Afghanistan. He wants to withdraw the pitifully small number of troops we've left in these countries as a contingency for apparently no real reason. I side with Trump squarely on this. I'd never wanted our troops to be in Syria or Afghanistan in the first place. Look, it was always dumb to go into Afghanistan. Bush sends 70,000 people over, can't catch the one person that he supposedly wanted to catch, and there's a reason for that. I don't think that the Defense Department wanted to catch Osama too quickly anyway. They wanted him to exist so that they had an excuse to continue occupying all those opium fields. And as far as like the Iraq and Syria region, which is joined at the hip, obviously, they share a border. The problems there, a lot of them have been solved just by the fact that we've withdrawn support mostly for the FSA. The FSA, the Free Syrian Army that was pockmarking the country with militants, basically. The so-called moderate rebels, which they never were. We backed them. It was a mistake. It was a foreign policy blunder on the same order almost as invading Afghanistan in the first, Iraq in the first place. Yes, we should absolutely leave. We're not allied with the nation of Syria. We're not allies with the nation of Afghanistan. It barely has even a functioning government. Our government has had to parlay with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and groups like that. We literally had to discuss diplomacy with people that we have declared illegitimate and spent years killing because ISIS showed up. And they're like, well, this is so much worse. We're gonna, have to join forces and beat on them. And don't worry, we'll cede land to the Taliban of all groups. Now, we're kind of responsible for the problems in Afghanistan in the first place. We weaponized them against the Soviets. Oh, it worked wonders. That mountain warfare ground down those Soviet troops real quick. So many people died. They made statues out of the burned out tanks and APCs and shit. It's quite an accomplishment considering that there weren't actually that many militants. They were probably, they were outgunned, certainly. I think they were outmaneuvered and outmanned multiple times by the Soviets and still managed to win. And the Soviets were trying to make the push to the ocean to sort of connect their holdings through Iran. It didn't work too well. But anyway, here's what I would say. It's a crazy idea to continue perpetually being in all of these countries. We're not wanted, number one. And number two, the world situation has changed. When we invaded these countries, see, you've got to understand post-World War II history and the history of energy production especially. So the nuclear standoff, the early Cold War. You have to understand especially the 50s to understand why we've been in the Middle East so often for so many decades. In World War II, one reason why the Germans did so well for so long holding out on a three-fucking-front war is they had greater access to fuel. They had greater access. The energy productivity of the Middle East was partially at their disposal through their allies within the region. They got along fairly well with these countries, which is why the British and French moved in to carve them up afterwards. I wonder why. Put their own puppets in charge. Yeah, they want basically the post-colonial redrawing of those maps really has to do with energy production and raw resources and the availability of them to the West to keep them out of Soviet hands. What's the problem? We destabilize so many of these regions that they end up actually liking the Russians more. Like even in the wake of the USSR collapsing, Russia's a shell of its former glory. It has nowhere near the power that it had 30 or 40 years ago. It's minute compared to what it had. But there are still plenty of people willing to partner with them preferentially over the West because of the way we've been imperializing the Middle East. Eisenhower and all these others started interfering with Middle Eastern affairs in order to make sure that the Soviets were starved of some of those energy resources. It's part of the grand chessboard. In this era, it's the same thing as like modern suburban design. The reason you build suburbs is to get people more spread out over a wider area so that it makes it harder for the Russians to be able to kill everyone. What do you think green energy is for? It's so that energy can continue to be produced even after the normal world trade has broken down and there's no availability of anything other than maybe coal, really. Nuclear plants have melted down. The gas fields are all on fire. No one's going to be left to extinguish them for 1,000 years. The oil, you can't really pump it. Nobody's around that can work the rigs. But you've got solar, you've got wind. Some of it would still be operational, especially the wind, potentially in remote areas. And so you'd still have power. If you're looking at the 50s and 60s and all the advancements there, they're really prefaced on the understanding of the Great War experience from prior decades and the Cold War experience thereupon. In the wake of the USSR collapsing, for a while we got decadent, And then the reason why we ended up in Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. That was always a bullshit lie, and everyone knows it. It was really, again, it was attempting to go in and fix the problems that had been spawned in sort of the non-interventionist prior period, where people got a little bit lazy. That's why Bush invaded Iraq. It really was for oil in a roundabout way. But look at the modern situation. Now we're the #1 energy producer. We have the most oil output, the most gas output, the most coal output, I believe, or second or third on that. Huge amount of green energy. Venezuela is really where we should be concerned. There are 2 theaters we should be putting all of our effort into right now. Korea, because of minerals that we're going to need, and you know, the fact that we'd have one less rogue nuclear state, and Korea, highly literate area. The rejoining of Korea would be wonderful for for the progress of the world, and really de-escalate a flashpoint that could start a nuclear war. It's kind of important. And the other one's Venezuela. Largest proven oil reserves, by the way. You know, Mike Pence called Guaido, and then he declared himself president. I think I might have said that in the last video, although it might have been on the first take of this video, actually. And so you got a situation where things are changing in the world. Why do you think Obama had his Asian swing, which didn't work? You know, Trump's is, but his didn't. It's because the world is different than it was back in the 50s. Reliance on oil in the Western countries is quickly declining, and we've got so much of it anyway, we can at least supply ourselves. No, it's no longer as necessary, and Russia has a huge output. They don't need to buy oil from the Middle East. Nobody's going to buy it anymore. You know, there's no such thing as peak oil anyway, if I'm right. I think that oil is produced by chemotrophs and other extremophiles in the Earth's crust that gets tectonically squeezed from areas of higher to lower concentration, sort of melded around, and then enters these sort of pockets of porous rock and forms these pools underneath the ground over time. I think it's literally bacteria piss that you're burning in your car. Yeah, that's what I believe. I've seen plenty of other odd theories. It's melted dinosaurs. It's compacted plant matter. It's just degraded rock that just happens to turn into a more or less organic style material, which doesn't make, I think, full sense. Maybe a little bit, kind of, sort of. You know, maybe the propane and shit in the ground is just bacterial farts. That's possible. The result of them, gobbling up, radiotrophs, chemotrophs, and other, bacteria. Detritivores, decomposing matter. I know I got off on a tangent there, but I mean, long story short, we don't need to be in the Middle East. It's not necessary. The idea that we need to stay in Syria, it's like we shouldn't have been there in the first place. Assad doesn't want us there. The Russians don't want us there. You're antagonizing a Cold War style situation. Didn't we just withdraw from the intermediate missile test ban treaty, or whatever it's called? Didn't we just withdraw from yet another nuclear treaty because the Russians weren't honoring it? Yeah, we're basically back in the 80s as far as our relationships with the Eastern Bloc, which has reformed itself nicely now with China and BRICS. So, the world situation's a little different now. Focus on the big situation and stop worrying about what Assad does. Nobody over here should lose a moment's sleep no matter what Assad says. He doesn't have WMDs other than some mustard gas and sarin and shit that they can't even prove that he was the one that deployed it. The rebels there, the moderates, they were deploying crude chlorine-based chemical weapons, though. We can prove that happened. It's an interesting time, isn't it? That's about all. Peace out.